It's because they saw you.
I don't have my key programmed to here.
Too top secret.
Yeah.
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries on your feedlot, Donna?
Oh, is that deliberate or what's that?
I've been starting to
I
get,
don't think my people, I don't think they're very active.
I was starting to get a number.
We have
of them,
everything
like, I
set
got
up out
ambushed in
this direction and then
Aries.
Oh, do we not want to sit over
Neighbor
here?
across the street,
Well,
run over to me at
historically they haven't
lunchtime.
because we haven't had enough people. But
So,
I'm open. It's
Maybe we
kinda
just
set
wait
up
till
where-
it starts.
over there.
Yeah, if you don't mind. It's
Yeah, I
not
don't
a-
mind.
A
Hey,
number of phone calls
hey.
on it. It's starting to.
We're not sitting over here, we're sitting over there.
oh,
are we?
I wondered about that since everything is, well, you know, I heard
Wanna
about
write
it
it on there?
first.
Yeah.
That's what I heard about
Did you-
first, yeah.
Did you?
And then I went and
Texting
talked to
always
Gary.
works good,
'cause I
too.
didn't
Does
know
it
what
good?
was going on.
Good, good.
So
Hey,
y'all
you
are
sir,
sitting
308?
over there? What?
I only have one
What'd you say?
problem.
So y'all were sitting over
Yeah,
there?
I guess so, that's what Brent said.
Well, that's what they, well, last year Tom said it was.
How am I gonna
three
feel
people.
important if I'm not up here
Well,
though? You
And my
know?
point is, I wanna test these mics.
Oh, do you?
And I
Well, I
told
just
check.
have this
You
stuff,
can check.
if I put it all the way back here, then people in the audience can't see, but it blocks people.
Let's see how many people are sitting in the audience. If there's nobody sitting in the audience,
I'll
I
turn
want
it
them to sit
around.
up here so I can hear them on YouTube and see if it sounds all right.
Be flexible, I guess. If no one shows, I'll turn this around and.
with sitting wherever.
And you live pretty close to the street?
I smell that once in a
So-
while.
But not
Not
very
regular.
The new thing is, we're gonna turn these on and leave them.
Leave them on?
Leave them alone.
Oh,
You don't have to grab them and pull them back to you
Well, we'll
anymore.
get it abbreviated.
you can hear me breathe.
Cause I
sitting
have, oh
here.
my goodness, I can hear it in the back corner of the room. But the mayor had some people complain to him that couldn't hear nobody.
Right.
So, all the mics are turned up pretty hot.
Yeah, they're loud, Les.
Are they on now?
Back there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
You can hear it?
Okay,
You can hear us?
Everything you say.
well,
Really?
how loud are they though? And that's what I'm trying to find out. That's why I want people sitting up here, Brent.
You're not here.
Yeah, we'll go up there and talk.
Hey, can you guys hear me? Hey, no, can you hear me? I'm talking to Jim Mesley, can you hear me?
Yeah, they'll be able to hear you whispering like that.
Which mic is it?
Yeah, it's loud.
We can talk about Lane.
Yep.
Talk about Lane real quiet up here.
Which one is?
Anybody here complain about Lane? Lane did this and Lane did that.
Just give me a list because that's normal. It's loud.
You can hear really.
So if I want to talk to Pete,
Well, you're,
I can shut it off.
yes. Yep.
Do that.
Can you still
Yep.
hear me, Lane?
No, just for testing.
Can you hear me?
No,
I cracked you.
Those two, I gotta sit closer so
Yeah,
I see them.
Well, you can pick up a packet also.
Yeah.
It has it.
If you guys wouldn't mind signing in, and you've got one sheet for all of you anyway.
For that, that's what we'll talk about.
How about that? Is that better?
Getting a lot of phone calls.
That,
Yeah, that's better.
that sound better? Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Testing, testing, testing,
Yeah,
testing,
that's better.
testing,
Now,
testing.
like you said, is what is it? while I
Testing,
use it?
testing. Well, that's what I gotta check.
Yeah. It is quieter, so.
Yeah, but it's just quieter to these speakers. I can turn down the gain on the mics any.
Well, they're doing that.
The other thing is
Oh, good, that one's on that,
But it's not, it's
little
not
skin
really
close street.
Well, that sounds good.
I didn't even block that in my campaign. I don't like it.
But yeah, Brent, if you would, if nobody shows up.
For that?
I'll flip it around.
Well, as an ambassador, I didn't put it
I did.
Oh, hey, gravel streets on here.
Very good.
Dirt streets here. This speed limit thing really good. Street over here, all of that. And last night, those people.
And
traffic and everything is.
Steve and I were talking, he said it's really just asphalt. Maybe come on.
Hey, what are you doing here?
You called?
We're locked out.
Lock the doors and you leave around here?
Dawn sent me that already. Thank you.
It's not very.
Are we up there?
And then did you
Oh.
get that email?
We did the same thing. Gotta bring your knife.
I'm gonna learn catch up eventually here. Hey, Matt. Good, how are you?
You gotta see how the other half lives, Todd.
What's that?
You gotta see how the other half lives.
Never gonna do this beer again.
Well, I don't think we've won.
It was, no, it was.
Congratulations on the vlog of the month. That was an awesome honor.
That was cool.
Yeah, that was cool, I saw that.
Yes, thank
Congrats.
you. She's doing something.
Sounds like experience.
Yes, there is experience behind that.
Hey, what's up? 2 weeks or 5, yeah, 2 weeks.
Oh, man, every one beer I have, I need
Oh. No, no. The city doesn't supply us dinners at these meetings.
Not even beer.
That was Nebraska
Good
language.
call, whatever you want, sit down.
I'm gonna eat the other half. Okay. Sounds good. Okay, bye.
Oh, well.
Thanks.
That's my wife telling me about my own for dinner.
Oh, I thought you meant.
This room was full.
Oh, no. She's on her way back from Grand Island, and, she goes, her friends are over. Do they feed you at those meetings? No.
How are you, sir? You moved in?
I moved in.
Everyone I went to, that's.
Her people are living at my house. I told Terry yesterday, I don't know what I'm gonna do when you guys are
It's always
done.
been talk.
Because we have time. I am. He says, almost to come over. They've been at my house for 5 weeks.
Oh, at least.
Oh, it's that, right?
Oh,
He's having a major renovation.
There's a lot of things.
I would enjoy that.
That's painting and painting the floors.
We don't got your shots yet?
Painting the floors.
Are you
And
at
you
home?
drive. What's that?
At open house?
I can, I'm gonna have, I am gonna have the council over. I'm gonna have the council over sometime. We'll barbecue or something. I think that's kind of fun. How we gonna do that?
Mike, are we going to like this was too?
Oh, you're right, and I literally did. I saw it.
I don't know, but I wanna take a drive.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Sounds good.
That's what we talked about.
Maybe if we invited the press, would it be all right? You want
Yeah.
a barbecue? Good with the
You
barbecue?
like hamburgers or hot dogs?
You're welcome.
I have to ask my wife, she's not here. She's also the press.
See what?
She's also the press.
She is the press.
Cover our bases, we like that.
So this is actually the hearing for the public.
Maybe we can have a meeting.
Just adjourn it real quick.
These chairs are really different.
Tuesday.
You listen to that Zoom
Great.
tomorrow.
For the council purposes, because we can have discussion on the 1 and 6, but can't
I
reprioritize.
appreciate being invited.
Okay.
As a body,
Okay.
forum situation.
Okay, so this isn't an open meeting, this is just
It's a public meeting, and you can just feel free to discuss and provide feedback,
okay.
just don't
Yeah,
reprioritize.
there are some young of you, aren't there?
Yeah, we do, there's 5 minutes.
That's good.
6?
Try to make sure I don't get too associated, I don't cause any trouble.
Is that why you're sitting over there?
Hi, Eric.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brent Berkland. I'm the city engineer, and thanks everybody for coming. If you haven't got over here to get signed in, I just ask you so we can register your attendance. And then there is, I think, 4 different sheets over here that you can grab one of each of the 4. They should mimic what we have up here, other than the finance part, which will be extra for your packet. But what we'll have up front is what you'll have in your hand. So hopefully between all of the above, you can read the pieces because gets a little small a print. This is the 1 and 6 road hearing, the public hearing for the 1 and 6 plan for the city of North Platte. And this is done on an annual basis, and there's multiple purposes for it. One of the purposes is the state of Nebraska requires for the funding to have a public hearing to allow public input on the infrastructure improvements. So that's one component. The other component is just the common sense part of planning for the city, and have a plan and a direction, taking all the streets and coming up with a plan and blending it with finances and needs and moving forward with that. So as the, just to give you a little background on the process, we started this last fall, and then with the change of council and mayor, things like that, we had a little bit of a lag as we were trying to get everybody on moving in the same direction as far as understanding and communicating from our end. And from the process, we went from, it's daunting when you look at what we'd like to do. We looked at $30 million and then started winnowing it down to 4 or 5 into the couple million range on some things that we're looking at right now. And so we've done a lot of work on trying to get it down to what we can handle, being as prudent as we can, but also trying to deal with the needs. So there's a tension between the needs and finances that we're always trying to juggle. And so that brings me to the first part that I think would be the piece that you'd want to look at. It'd be the same one that we have over here on the left and on the 2 screens. That is what we have. It's the 1-year plan. And some of this is nomenclature just to help understand. The 1-year plan is what we're planning on doing roughly in the next 12 months. The 2 and 6 portion, the state generically has a 6-year. That just means later. Now you can organize it within that 6-year, but it doesn't necessarily mean if it's on the next list, it's at the front of the list or the back of the list, and that we can kind of explain as we go through. But as far as the 1 and 6 program with the state, we have the plan with the public hearing, we have the financial report that we work on, and then there's a lane mile part. Those 3 pieces we keep internally. We used to submit all of the paperwork to the state. They changed that about 18 months ago. Now we keep it for audit purposes, but we still do the same paperwork. We just keep it at the city. So this is one of those 3 components that we're doing this evening. But over on the drawing, and I might just grab the little one here, and then I'll walk over here and just kind of show you what we're looking on the 1-year plan. The green is what we have. We completed this. We usually go by fiscal year, so September 30 is October 1. That's kind of the stop point. But in green, what we have completed is the State Farm Road overlay. We did that with the county, and then up by Wild West, by Scouts Rest Ranch, over by the Wild West Arena on the west and south. And also we have completed the downtown project, and the last one was a developer paid Twin Rivers Road. That's an extension of the concrete. So those were what were completed in this, we're reporting for completed last year. And actually, and this ended up in the wrong color, but William and Union, that was a project that the city forces did. They replaced the concrete intersection over there early this summer. And so those are the items that we had completed. And then what we have on the 1 year looking forward, and several of these pieces, these are what I'd call more of the project look. And West Brentwood, that's a developer project that's being paid for and completed by the developer. William Street, that's just north of the hospital, north of Francis, between Oak and Ash. That's another developer project. The hospital's paying for that. Sunrise, that's Menard's entrance to the west. That's a project that the college is moving forward with, so that they will have a drive from the highway to the college directly. And again, that's, I call it a developer paid for project. So Brentwood, William, and Sunrise were showing on our 1 and 6, but those are paid by private money. Lakeview, we have on this year, was on last year's, and we were waiting until the developer got moving forward, and they're moving forward with their foundations. So that's going to be moving forward here this year, and probably completed, it's going to be started this year, but rolling into the next year is the way I foresee it. Right now on Jeffers and Dewey, the state is working on the design for Jeffers right now, which intermingles with Dewey. And so that's underway, and that's a design only. That's listed as design only. And that's the same as 9th Street. 9th Street we put on the 1 year with the plan of this year we're going to start working on the design. This fiscal year we're going to start working on the 9th Street design. So that's what we're looking at for this, roughly this fiscal year is what we're headed towards. One other piece before I jump into there, we have a maintenance part. These are more I'd call kind of projects or really big maintenance like with the state. I have a maintenance sheet that I'll describe a little bit more on what we're looking at for this year as well. But yes, sir. Go ahead, Ed.
On that Lakeview project, Brent, is that gonna be a continuation with the boulevard, or is that gonna be, how's that gonna be laid out?
The plan, I think since the beginning was it's a 3-lane, and when I say think, from the beginning is my understanding, we've been shooting for a 3-lane. So it'd be a 2-lane with a center turn on that from A Street north.
Okay, so it won't have the center island.
Correct. There's several reasons for it. One is the power line would get in the way of doing that. There's not enough right of way. The other thing is the need for that size of facility stopping at Front Street. Those were the considerations. So.
I like that idea. I think that's much better use of taxpayer money, quite frankly. And then I had another question on Twin Rivers Road.
Yes.
That extension there, is that asphalt or concrete?
It's concrete.
That is concrete?
Yeah, it's 8-inch concrete.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that Lakeview, is that the developer or the city doing that, did you say?
The city's doing
Okay,
Lakeview.
city's, okay, thank you.
And I presume there's gonna be a walkway traffic
Correct.
for children?
That's a good question. Yes, we're going to put, normally we have a sidewalk that would go on that. We haven't decided 100%, but we're probably going to be curbside, and we're going to go 10-foot wide on the east. So that would go from the parkland, there's 2 cul-de-sacs, street, 2nd Street, then the apartments. So that walk path trail will go all the way from Front Street down to A Street.
So what about on the west side of Lakeview, as that's developed, how is the foot traffic gonna be accommodated there?
The city ordinance requires sidewalk to be put in as it's developed.
So there will be a sidewalk as the property's developed,
Correct.
not as the street is built?
Correct, that's right. So from Janus Court, where the houses are at on the very south side of that area, it's north of A Street, west of Lakeview, that Janus Court, we're gonna put sidewalk in that stretch, and then there won't be anything from there north. And what we found is if you put sidewalk in, it's gonna get destroyed between now and then, and you just have the developer do it at that time. There's only one, I think, farmhouse between there and, well, on that west side, north of Janus, so.
Okay, thank you.
Would you mind, I just wanted to make sure I understood that, so the 10-foot sidewalk that would kind of match up what we have on A Street, where's that going again?
It'd be curbside on the east side of Lakeview.
Okay, so that whole stretch of Lakeview that we're doing on the east side, so the power line's going to the other side?
No,
Or
it's
is it-
staying there and it's not in the way.
Okay, so the power line's gonna stay like it is?
Correct.
Then, okay,
We're not moving it.
okay, I'm very glad to hear that. And then we'll come in with a 10-foot kind of a trail style sidewalk that'll be curbside on the east side, and then when you're referring to the developer sidewalk, that'd be on the west side of that street.
Correct,
Okay,
that's right.
so that entire east side, and so the developer there along Lakeview, are they paying for any of that 10-foot sidewalk, or is that city install on that?
As it is, it's in the district, so the
Okay.
city would be paying for it, and there's some discussion as far as how they do the internal. They're gonna have internal sidewalks connect to A Street and connect to the Lakeview trails as
Okay.
well. So they're gonna have internal
Okay.
getting to there.
Okay, but in essence, we'll get a trails continuation there.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and then go from Front Street all the way down to A, so that's a pretty big connection, and there's quite a few rooftop or rooms, depending on with the apartments, so there'll be quite a few, and then the new apartments, there's gonna be quite a bit of people right in that area, and as it develops the other half,
Yeah.
that's, I think would be a pretty good piece of trail to get connected in.
I like that plan, thank you.
That answers my questions too.
Mine too. Oh, great, you guys all have the same question, similar, or maybe I gave you a long rambling answer that covered it all.
We covered it all.
Okay. So that's the 1 year, and then if you wanna grab, there's a 8.5 by 11, and it was busy enough, I thought it'd be easier to hand out a sheet. It was a little difficult to get shown on here, but it's red and blue. And the red is an asphalt mill, it's milling and overlay of asphalt. And the blue is a seal coat, which could be an armor coat or an oil. The process is similar, it's a different product. It's oil with an aggregate. So the blue, what we have shown is buffalo and willow and also Halligan. So that would be more of a maintenance. It's less structural than a mill and then what we call mill fill, but it's milling and then filling it back with hot asphalt. The blue is more of a maintenance coat that would be similar to a coating, like when you paint your house, things like that. It's a thinner, less structural, but it helps preserve the length, the life of the surface. And what we have shown in red is what we would like to do for asphalt milling. And the struggle we had was stopping points. I mean, we could keep on going, but what we really focused on was some of the areas that were in bad shape and that were heavier traveled corridors. If you notice, most of this is not residential. Like Bear Street over towards the west, that's more of a collector street, and a lot of these are collector / arterial. A couple of the areas just to highlight is Leota over by Walmart. The asphalt over there, that hasn't, nothing's been done with that since, from our records anyway, since it's been put in the late 90s. So we're in the 22 years since that was put in, when they did the Super Walmart, was when that asphalt was put in. And then going west on Leota, on the west side going over to Willow, that's a real heavily traveled area by a lot of the city, and the same thing on the north side with Francis. And then we have B Street going from McDonald. That's the street that goes by north and south by Adams and the rec center. That's McDonald going from there. And then we're going east, we're proposing going east all the way to, I think it's McCabe, Poplar, excuse me. No, Silver. So we'd go from McDonald to Silver. And over on the east side of B Street, we have concrete. I don't know if you've been over at either the west side of Craft State or in front, I think it's Cottonwood and then Silver. Some of those intersections are really rough. The concrete is structurally in good shape, but the surface is terrible pitted, probably an inch or so. And what they did, the city, when I say they, the folks in the past did for the city was they milled the concrete surface and put a real thin lift of asphalt in from the one-ways going west. And that, again, is probably in the 20-year range. If you're driving on B Street from the ones west, that's what you'll see. You can see some of the concrete cracks. It's held up very well. And we're looking at doing that same, it'd be about an inch of milling to get rid of that real rough surface and then put in an asphalt lift on that. Yes.
I just want to say something about that street. When I left in '82, I think it was, I worked at the craft building, and that street was that way then. And I came back here in '06, and driving down that street, and I said, they haven't done anything with this street yet. So I'm glad to hear that.
So
It's like chicken pox. Isn't
yes,
it?
it really
It's
is.
terrible, yeah.
It's really rough surface.
Terrible
And
with bicycle.
But the concrete isn't cracked, it's not falling
No.
apart and caving in,
It's not.
but the surface is not good. And
Yeah.
so, structurally, we wanted to take as little as we could out, but get a good road, driving surface. So, and you can look through the other elements on what we're looking at. So, budget-wise, what we're roughly looking on this part, and we have it identified as, other overlays, is we're roughly around the $2 million mark for the seal coat and the mill and fill, the asphalt, is what we're looking at in this, probably in the next 12 months. We're going to see a little bit on how schedules with contractors fit. And one of the reasons, the urgency we felt with this is just look at the gas pump. Asphalt is directly connected to what we see at the gas pump. So as that's going up, that was one of our concerns as far as prioritizing what we were looking at, was trying to get as much asphalt done for our bang for our buck on that. Because if it goes up in price 20%, we get 20% less done for the same money. So that's what we were looking at. Again, these were a lot of collector arterial streets. We have 4th Street on there. There's several areas, and if there's some time you need to digest on that, but that's what we're looking at. And I call this more of our maintenance portion of our project. So,
Brent, there's a break on Willow where the overpass is. Are you gonna do that as well?
no, that's concrete. So we're stopping, good observation, we're not doing where the concrete. On Willow, that is that's the seal coat, and it's more of a preservative. So we're just doing it on the asphalt that's probably 5 years old, I think, 4 to 5 years old over in that area. And so it's just on the asphalt portion, not on the concrete portion of Willow.
Rick, just a quick
Yes.
question and
Mhm.
comment. First of all, in addition to your comment about the gas pump and asphalt prices going up, if there is major federal dollar flow into infrastructure projects, you're gonna have everybody and their dog trying to contact track projects. So I think being on these early wise for that reason too. But did you look at Eugene, that, how the flow is a little awkward there at Eugene, where you kind of have the curve and you're coming out of the ass? When you guys were looking at this maintenance project on Eugene, was there any consideration given to the traffic flow and the configuration of that? Or are you comfortable with the way that's set up?
Well, that's a great question. This was more, on this particular part, was more of just that it's deteriorating fast, so we wanted to get the surface back because it's kind of changed. The amount of traffic going over to the gas stations over there has increased. And so we wanted to get the surface back. Now, as far as the geometry or the configuration of that, it's really awkward. And a lot of that was driven by the state, when they did the interchange and the frontage road configuration. And there'll be just the part over by Cenex. There's been discussions of how to configure that, but that involves the state as well. So it's not simple, and it involves right-of-way and things like that. But it is, I mean, when you ask the question, if I'm not really comfortable with it, but trying to fix it's another mountain to address, but it's a good question.
Okay, thanks.
Brent, have we in the past routinely put a seal coat on our asphalt streets?
Yes, I would say it hasn't been in a while, but we have done it. We haven't done as much, I'd say, recently. And again, it's a tool in the toolbox that I think you have to strategically use, in the right spot, in the right location with the condition of the road. It works better with less heavy traffic. I mean, probably weight, trucks. If you have a heavy truck route, I think you'd have to look at that carefully. And you also have to look at the surface condition of the road too. If you have like Buffalo and Willow in the condition it is now, I don't think it would work very well because it has a very tight surface. But in the past, I've seen ebb and flow of it being used more or less. And sometimes people don't like it there's loose aggregate for a while. So for some of the faster, maybe the B streets, I know it's not fast, but people drive it faster. The rocks come up a little bit more on some of those major collector arterial roads. But on some of the residential neighborhoods, my observation is it's worked well. But it's, again, a tool in the toolbox because it has more of a 3 to 7 year kind of life consideration. Hot mix has probably more of a 12 to 25 year range, and I give you those range because there's a lot of variables: subgrade, traffic, turning movements, semis, weather. You know, there's a lot of conditions, so that's the range. And then concrete, you can be 30 to 70 years. You know, that type of. But it's one of the tools that's, I think, good to use, and it's fairly inexpensive compared to asphalt. It's probably 10 times less expensive, and asphalt's probably 10 times armor coating cost.
So this isn't just some type of an emulsion that protects the coat or the top of the asphalt?
Well, there's two of them. There's one that is a rejuvenator, which is more of that. There's I guess a proprietary brand called Pro Seal, and that's more of a rejuvenator. It's an emulsified that you spray, put sand on. That's one type. And then there's Armor Coat, which is a different oil, and you put in like 3/8 gravel, which you get more structure with. So there's a couple different variations of the seal coat. And what we were looking at on Buffalo and Willow was more of the emulsified that goes in probably 3/8 of an inch and rejuvenates the surface where you get oxidation and UV degradation of the top part of the asphalt, and it starts cracking. And then the Armor Coat we're looking at where you need a little more structure. And so that would be like we were looking at Halligan and a small portion of Halligan, and then over on, I don't think I trimmed off it'd be on the east part of Walker. I didn't trim it off right, but we're just going to put it over on the south side of the lake. So, I mean, those are the areas that you can help with a little more structure. You have some rock, 3/8 rock, and like I said, the Pro Seal type product is more of a surface dressing to help preserve it. So, different tools.
Well, I think, personally, I think it's great that you're using that type of a mechanism, the Pro Seal especially, because we may spend a little money up front, but if we can increase the length of the life of the concrete, it's money well spent. I commend you for doing that. I haven't seen us do that before, at least not very often. And I think that's, from my perspective, a wise move.
We're trying to stretch the money as much as we can because we have more needs than, probably the normal thing is we have more needs than money. So we're trying to look at every way that we can to get as much accomplished as we can. So we don't want roads to fall apart, so that's the tension we're trying to balance. So that kind of covered the maintenance. I'd call it the maintenance plan. That's an additional sheet. It's not shown on there because if I put that on here, then it's a mess. So, Lane, go
I
ahead.
would add on that, Brent, that this is mainly asphalt areas that we're concentrating on this sheet. We will continue to use our same plan where we're replacing concrete panels around town and streets where they're broken up, and that's, obviously there's more of those that we can get done in the summer, but we'll try and hit the worst ones around town, and we have some areas already looked at that we're gonna hit, but those are maybe a couple panels here on this whole block or something to make the block, the street better. So there'll be concrete work that the city crews will be doing on top of this work here. So last year we poured about 700 yards of concrete, and we hope to do about the same this year. That's a big portion, like we said, on the Williams and the Union intersection stuff, but we'll be doing that on top of this, so.
That's already budgeted, right?
Yes, that's in the regular street maintenance part of the budget.
Cubic yards.
700 cubic yards.
Yeah.
And thanks for bringing that up. Matt and Lane and I have had several meetings going through trying to optimize what we're doing because the city they want to minimize how much maintenance they do on things like this. Not that if there's a problem they won't fix it, but if they can focus their patching or other things in different areas instead of going over here and then having the contractor mill it all out, that we've been trying to optimize the effort to get the most bang for our buck with our planning. So the last piece that I was going to I should ask, is there any other questions at this point?
You were talking about the cottonwood and area stuff around Craft. I don't see that on this map.
That is on
on the maintenance plan?
It would be on B Street, it's the red one.
Right,
Um,
okay, so you're just talking about that,
yes, this
not
stretch.
necessarily other parts.
Correct. No, it'd be on the north side of the craft.
All right,
B Street is the focus on that.
very good, okay.
And I guess the last part is, it's kind of lumped all together, but some of this comes from the state formatting of 1 and 6. 1 is what you're gonna do, and 6 is what you're gonna do later. And we've talked internally about, it's kind of categorized in some ways internally, but not as far as the presentation, as far as the state has looked. But a lot of this has some long-term thinking, and we've talked about, might be master planning in some of it, but some of it is issues that are coming up sooner than later. Just to give you an example, on the 9th Street, I don't have it labeled up here correctly, but it's on your sheets correctly, but we're looking at construction on 9th Street on 22-23 timeframe. And so in the 6th category, this would be higher on the 6-year plan than, to give you an example, on State Farm, we have the plan of making that an urban section. That from going from Newberry to Highway 83, someday we'd like to have that be a normal city street, a 3-lane facility. And then same thing, having State Farm west to Buffalo. So just again, to give you that idea that if you were to ask me, well, this is on the 6-year plan, but this is actually probably the 25-year plan. We don't know. Maybe there's a development that comes up that forces it. But these are probably more the 25-year. This is imminent. And so within this plan, they're organized a little bit, but they're all presented on this, in this direction. On the Jeffers, again, this is a state-driven plan. We have Jeffers from where they stopped, about 1st Street, 8th Street area, south, down to Leota, and then Dewey back the other direction. And what they were looking at schedule-wise was bidding that 2023 and construction in 24, 25, depending on how it goes. And then they're gonna have a year break and then go back up north on Dewey. That's the plan as of now, which is always subject to change, but that's where things are at.
Will the city have a lot of infrastructure to replace there like we did downtown?
We're doing the water main, that's the water district that we did on Jeffers. That's getting ahead of the state project. So that we're looking at on Jeffers. On Dewey, I don't think we're in bad shape. We're in pretty good shape on Dewey. So it's mainly getting the Jeffers side fixed.
Okay, so when you said 24, 25, would that be just the Jeffers portion?
Correct.
Okay, I see, and then Dewey after that.
So, and they're still on the design, so that might shift a little bit one way or the other, but that's kind of the preliminary information we have on that.
Regarding 9th Street, is there anything that we need, if we were to see, Donna might have to close her ears, she doesn't like me to talk about federal money, but taking federal money, right? But if we would see major federal stimulus here allocated to the city level that isn't highway, major highway related, it would seem like 9th Street would be the perfect spot to utilize funds like that. Is there anything we need to do as a community to have it more trigger ready? I know you've got it in design phase. Is there anything that would prepare it better for that opportunity in this way?
If it was designed 100%, potentially, I mean, that might help on in the past when they've done stimulus things, they've talked about shovel ready.
Yeah.
Basically you have to have a design on the shelf. Lakeview would fall in that category. I mean, if that would be available, that would be one we could just say, we got a design, let's go, can we put it in this category?
We have a favorable, I don't, you never know what those programs are gonna look like, but we do have a potentially favorable census tract at 9th.
Yes. The other part that's favorable with exactly what you're talking about, this was a federal aid route up to that point.
Okay.
So meaning federal money was used from the one-ways to where it's at about a little bit west of Sherman. So I think we have a lot of dominoes lining up in that respect if we're looking at that would fit a federal aid scenario already.
Okay.
If, to Lucas's point, if, Ty Lucas said it, if the federal funding came available, is there any way to work with the state to expedite Jeffers and Dewey also? Or are we time bound by other projects that they may have as higher priority?
Well, that's a good question. I think it'd be worth exploring with them if, I think from a financial end, there's a design going on right now. Once that's completed, then I don't know why, it'd just be a money in their program queue, how that fits at the state level. But it'd be definitely worth, I think, exploring that question and try to have a plan, a game plan, if this were to happen, how could we expedite? Because that is a big dollar item. And I think we're looking at roughly, it's probably in the $8 to $10 million range, that if that's closer to shovel ready, that would be great to, I think it's a real good idea.
Brent, just, I've noticed there on North Jeffers, in the courthouse area and in that intersection of Fourth and Jefferson and South, we're seeing some pretty rapid degradation of that concrete surface for sure. I don't know what about the structural, I presume the structural's okay, but what can be done about that? I'm sure you've noticed it.
Yeah, and some of it was when it came from grinding, they ground the surface off because it was a little rough in some of those areas. So that's where some of the degradations happened, is where they did grinding to get it smoother in that stretch. And that's something we probably have to work with the state on. That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for you right now.
Well, that started coming apart about the day after they laid it down.
Well, and a lot of that was the grinding. The grinding did not help because it took off the seal, where the concrete was sealed. And when they had finished it, and then they went and ground that seal off, so then down below wasn't as protected, and so it's kind of loose more. I think long-term structurally we're in good shape, but it's something that we'll definitely be talking with the state about as far as if they have any thoughts on.
Well, we're seeing some of it too on the Jeffers Street overpass. Some of the same type of scenario where it's coming apart.
You don't have that overpass on here, but that's slated for the summer.
Yeah, and I didn't put the
That's
pure,
100% state.
yeah, it's 100%. So and it's the same thing with Newberry. Newberry is 100%, we didn't show it on our list. It's one of those things that we maybe could show it as a courtesy, but it's not really a city-involved project. That's why we have, these two are 20% city involvement. And so, good question. Yeah. And again, we have several of these, like South County Road, that's not, or South River Road, that's not in the city, but that's probably in the long term, that is something that we'd be looking at as that develops, but it's kind of in the long range plan. We have Eugene to the city limits being made into a city type street instead of more of the county road asphalt with ditch. And we have replacing around Francis and Leota some of the concrete. Again, that's a higher volume area. That's on the 2 to 6 year range on the window there. Another point I don't know if I need to read all of it to you, but I could just highlight a few. But one of the pieces was improving the Rotary Road ditch. That would be a nice, don't know exactly where that fits. There's been discussions with the state. That's the irrigation ditch, drainage ditch that goes in front of the county. Along through there, we've talked about if we could enclose that, make the top a trail, like do a concrete box, put the top as a trail. It's a money issue. There's a lot of good ideas, but the money at some point is the catch on that. But that's also along the state. We've talked with the state if there was some way that we could incorporate that with the federal aid process or things like that. But at this point, it seems like it's more of, they said, sure, we'll do it, you pay for it. But we've been chasing that a little bit as far as what we could look at. So that's in the longer range, what we wish. And so those are some things that it's good to have the big picture plan. So we have the 1 year, the 2 year, and then some of the future planning to have on the radar. If this area, the industrial area between Walmart and the highway really develops, to have that on radar is something we need to address. Does anybody have any questions on thought process? And one piece that is available for you all is we have the complimentary inclusion of all the costs of what we want and wish and hope to have happen. And don't add them all up because you might not be excited about it.
If I remember right,
Yes.
the county put their part of Eugene on their, I think their one-year plan this year. So how would that, how would what we do and when we do it on the city limits side go along with what the county is doing?
I think what the county was looking at was improving the width to a minimum, the county road standard.
Okay.
And it's not the same as the city standard. So as of right now, I think it would make it more of, because it's fairly narrow in some stretches, and the right-of-way is not the right-of-way width that we need for city streets. So I see theirs being more in the shorter term, ours is in the longer term. And there's other pieces that might fit. What would happen right now is if we were to do Eugene together, we'd have a transition from a city section to a county section. That's what would happen right now if we were to do that.
I just have a question. Is Newberry a state or is that city?
It's a link, yeah, it's a state.
It's considered.
But
Newberry
over-
North,
Right.
Oh, okay, from the interstate north.
correct. And that's on the Build Nebraska list to widen Newberry from a 2-lane to a 4-lane. And that's, I believe, been approved for the current 10-year window for the design. And so, but that could again fall into the whole, if there's a stimulus, where does that fit as well, so.
And then do I dare mention, would that be a truck route?
It is a truck route.
They'd use it.
I mean, the highway, that's considered part of the highway system, so it gets you to Highway 30 east and west, so. I think if that was made a little, in the Build Nebraska part, if that gets up to a 4-lane facility, it'll make it easier. The trucks usually go the path of least resistance, the easiest way to go. So if it's easier, if that's improved, I would anticipate they maybe want to go that way a little bit more. But the other thing is they have to be going from somewhere to somewhere to take it, so that's.
I notice it says, I think, alternate route or something. It doesn't even say truck route on the signs out there, so they probably don't even know it's even there.
Well, the professional ones, they usually are pretty good with their mapping, so they usually are more about speed. They gotta get from A to B fast,
I know.
so, but.
So it looks like, you told me not to look at the numbers, but I don't remember. It looks like we have about $3.5 million committed this year in our projects. That's roughly what I'm looking at, and is that's not, and I should know this, but I don't, is that a budgeted item, or is that a bond issue, or how does that? Where does that?
Where, if you're looking down on the projects.
I'm looking at the 1 year,
Like
so.
the seal coat surfacing, those
I'm
would
not
be
even
bonded.
going there, yeah, seal coat, okay, so the 2 million there is roughly, that's bonded.
And then the 900,000 on Lakeview, that was a paving district, so that would be bonded as well.
Okay,
And, so yes, I mean.
so
that
that
would be on the
3.5
bond,
million is
correct.
not a bond.
Yes, and when the bonding actually happens will coincide with the contractor. If you're looking at it time frame wise, you had a bid, then they get started, then they submit payments, and then those are sent for warrants, and then they accumulate, and then a bond. So the reality is the bonding, there's a lag from when it's bid to when actually a bond occurs. And
Is 9th Street in that 3.5?
not in the 1 year, no. It's just because we're doing the design, so we're not gonna have, I don't think we'll have warrant items. There might be, I guess, if we get through the design, but at this point, I'm not foreseeing that. We might have a geotech report, we'll initiate the creation of a district so that we can start putting external cost to it at some point, but probably not in this calendar year, or fiscal year, I should say, by September 30th.
Brent, on the Lakeview project, in a normal circumstance, would the developer be responsible for putting sidewalks on the east side of Lakeview?
They're responsible to do a portion of it, yes.
So is there any way to go back to them and say, hey, under normal circumstances, you guys would be paying for a sidewalk, we're willing to split it half and half?
That's something we can definitely have as a discussion. When we get into the district and the financing, it gets a little, it's something we probably need to visit with Terry about, the attorney, and see how mechanically you'd make that happen.
Well, I mean, we gave them a lot of money through TIF, it would seem like that if we're saving them some money and not having to
TIF is
put in a
supposed to go for
sidewalk.
infrastructure, you're right, absolutely.
I mean, they ought to be willing to accommodate us a little bit too. I mean, we've given them a lot of money for that project, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but if we have to spend all of the money, city money, taxpayer money, to build a sidewalk, which in essence probably should have been part of their infrastructure costs, then maybe they should be looking at paying the city a little bit of that.
And we can look at that, we'll discuss that. And there, again, we're looking about 10 foot, the normal is about 4, and we can talk to them about that.
Buck here, buck there.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. We'll have that discussion.
Thank you.
A comment on that, and I know we talked about it before, that's something we should all watch very carefully when those redevelopment agreements come through that are part of the TIF. Because I think our redevelopment agreements can be specific to those kinds of things in a TIF. And so I think getting our input to the CRA early in those projects, because I don't know what that agreement says now. I know we talked about this at that point in time, I remember that, but just as I think that as council members, that's something we need to keep our eyes on at the redevelopment agreement phase.
I mean, even if it's such a thing that we let the contract and the whole sidewalk bit gets built, but then the developer would reimburse the city for his portion of that. That way they would still get the benefit of having the overall contract cost.
Yes, and it would be all done in a way that they don't have to manage at all.
Exactly.
And
Which would be an advantage to them.
And we'll have a very defined public bidding. You can see the cost. It'd be very straightforward in that respect. But we would be going with the lowest responsible low bidder. So in theory, we'll be getting the best price that we can get. So.
Exactly.
Eric.
Brent, this has been a great meeting. I've been going, as you know, to road meetings for many decades, and this is perhaps the biggest attendance at a 1 in 6 road hearing, maybe ever. And what's particularly encouraging is the interest of city council members who are here and asking very good questions and making good points. That's very exciting for the future of this community. Also, this maintenance plan, this is the most transparent, most comprehensive maintenance plan that I've ever seen from the city, and it's very encouraging. It gives the public good information, and just maybe even more important, it shows good planning so you can take advantage of economies of scale and cooperation with the counties. When the asphalt plant is here, it's just, this is good management, and I've never seen anything this comprehensive this early. I want to commend you.
Thank you.
Just two other points. You talked about Newberry access and interchange. The state's main interest was the interchange, as you know, which is at times watching slow motion as those trucks get packed up as can be. Sometimes it works well, but other times it is just a joke. We need much more capacity out there, And the city has a greater interest in Newbury access than it did just a year ago, even because you designated land for industrial development. I don't know if it's appropriate to put the Newbury improvements on this plan or not, because it is a state highway link, but it is an important project, and I would hope the city does everything we can to get behind the state, moving that forward as soon as possible. It has the potential to have big benefits for the city. And finally, one thing you haven't addressed here today, but I know you're very aware of it. We have a real bottleneck in our transportation system around Leota and the 83. And it may be appropriate to work with the state to get some engineers to look at that and figure out all the options, little things, big things we might do, so that we can make that area pretty much between the exit and entrance to the interstate and just to the north of Leota. So we can make those one-ways work much better, make the often people are backed up making left turns and clogging the whole thing, and it's we've been given a tough problem, but engineers often can make improvements, but it's not going to happen unless somebody does some study, and then the council can weigh in on what makes sense and things like that. Wonderful plan, thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you coming in. You appreciate your long-term perspective. You have a different perspective because I've seen you at many meetings over the years.
You're saying I'm old, right?
No. I've just changed, instead of the joke of being 29, it's like, oh, we'll go with 40. So I'm okay with 40. But I appreciate your comments, and just, I think it's really good observations. It's general information. I've talked to the state in discussion about Newbury to build Nebraska, and just asked them about the industrial area being designated over there on what that might mean for speeding up some of their improvements. Because what they've described to me is there's a 10-year window on the Build Nebraska. There's a 10-year, the first 10-year and the second 10-year. That's kind of like our 1 and 6 plan. That I would say this is higher up on the list than this, as I explained. And it's the same thing within their 10-year windows. So it's good that we made their 10-year windows, but then where does it fit? You know, it can be in the front or the back. It sounds like the design were more on the back of the first 10-year, which I don't remember the exact window that hit. Probably the 2027, 6 range in that range. So we're more on the back on the design, but on the build, it's probably up for discussion. And I think as we see things, you know, depending on how things develop, that's something we can push on to try to get it reorganized within those windows. And
I've learned one thing in going to state is the town is powerful when it gets behind one state project and pushes hard. And then when that's done, you figure out the next one, because it takes many years to get a project built.
And the other part on the ones, those are under design right now, and so I've had some discussions with them. They're well aware of the bottleneck at Leota in between Dewey and Jeffers. We've talked about different things we can do. One thing that has helped, it's still being adjusted, is the traffic lights. They redid all of the traffic light hardware, the innards. I mean, when you look, they don't look any different because the lights and the lenses are all the same, but they've changed what's in the cabinets. And that was done last fall up until early January, February, and they don't quite have it adjusted yet. They're still working on some of it, which in theory will help with the traffic movement. It's better than what we had for the hardware. If you've experienced going from Leota, hitting a red light at Francis, hitting a red light at Phillip, hitting a red light on E, I've hit every light red both directions. And the hardware has made that a lot better. But I've noticed, I've talked to the state about the queuing on Leota West. Used to be you could go north, turn left, and it'd be green, so you don't get as much traffic. And I've noticed sometimes there's 6 cars stopped because you can't turn any more left. And that's a timing, signal timing. That doesn't fix geometry or that being too narrow, but it can make it better. But that's something that's been talked about, and that's something we should push on, we'll keep pushing on now, on how we can, because that's a bottleneck, period.
One of the problems, and maybe the biggest problem, is the East Bridge is just in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was poorly thought out of, and ideally it ought to be a 3-lane bridge, and it ought to be tilted so it heads out to the northeast, so it lines up better to where Dewey really is.
And maybe that's something we can, I'll send the state an email, ask them some questions on master planning. When they go to Dewey, what can we do, so to speak? What can we do with Dewey? But great questions, and thanks for your input too, Eric.
On that same topic as Leota, I know there was a point in time where the right-of-ways were getting arranged for a potential turn lane at that area, at Leota going facing east, was it, several years ago? So if you were right in front of the old well shop,
Yeah, that the right turn lane was put in.
yeah, is that still, will that be on the radar at all as you're looking at, Jeffers and Dewey are getting worked on?
As far as additional right turn lanes or turn lanes coming off of side streets, which,
Well,
What
I'm
were you
talking
thinking
about
at?
I was thinking that the right-of-ways got arranged in a way where you could actually almost add another lane there, but I'm thinking back a few years. But right where the demolition's going on right now, I think, does the city have widened right-of-way there?
There is a right-hand turn lane there already.
Yeah, is it, I'm just trying to think, was the plan to do something with that or widen it, or was there some concept a few years ago that I
I don't remember.
just with Leota or with the one-ways?
with Leota? To try to, was it, maybe the idea was to lengthen it, I don't recall what
Maybe
the
it was
idea
the
was.
length in it. That's probably what it was, but that kind of course, got pushed back when.
Yeah, I know that was one of the things we had talked about a few years ago to help that bottleneck to that area.
One of the other discussions that has come up with the Dewey project is maybe putting a right-hand turn lane over next to the Quick Stop, coming out of Walmart.
It'd be on Leota, as you're looking west, it'd be right turn going north on the one-ways north. Because there's quite a few, you know, if you look, it's about west, north, and if you could shorten that up, it helps people get across faster, but it might even make it worse, because more cars get across than the bottleneck. You know, you get everybody across faster.
I'm probably mixing 3 or 4 histories into one thing or something, so.
The state asked us if we had any suggestions on the ones, that was basically the only one we could really come up with.
I think we talked about also coming north into town, having a turn lane
Oh.
going to, in Walmart, also a right turn only lane, so that you actually have 4 at that intersection.
Right.
To try and get traffic go faster also.
There's quite a few cars, I mean, it's about the same thing, depending on maybe a Saturday morning, it feels like about every 3rd car is turning right into Walmart, and if you can get them in their own lane, it allows people to get into town quicker, and people who wanna go that way. There's some definite physical obstacles, because there's a gas meter, everything comes above ground over there in that corner, we've got traffic lights, not that it's insurmountable, but there's obstacles that have to be addressed, and those are things that we've talked about, but they're mainly focused on the Jeffers portion right now, but anything that interconnects between Jeffers and Dewey, that's definitely on the radar, but we've focused on that south end, so.
Talking about the streetlights, just for my own information, just so I understand that. I got new hardware in there. Is there any kind of logic that controls those lights, or are they just set, so they on a timer, or how does that work?
Well, they vary a little bit.
Okay.
On Rodeo Road, they have, I think radar installed on Rodeo Road. They have it on Eugene. They have presence detectors on Walker and State Farm. They're magnetic loops that detect vehicles. And I think they added them, they put them on Adams, I thought they put radar on
Yeah,
Adams.
planning on putting on that, yes, they did put on Adams also.
And those, but then they're timed, right now they're a timer. So they have some sensors and some timers. If no one is on one of the legs on Rodeo Road,
So it's talking specific about the Leota intersection, how are those set?
those are timed.
Those are timed.
Correct.
Okay,
And with the new hardware, they're connected so that they can remotely change it.
gotcha. So.
Before they opened up the cabinet, adjust time, now they can do it with a computer via
You
the
got,
internet.
you have cameras up there that you can watch?
Those they don't,
Okay.
so they still have timing, but with, you know, like Google Earth and things like that, you can really get the distances down and speed limits. So they're still working on adjusting that, and they've really been, state's been great with talking to them, you know, as they continue to adjust it.
So when you say they have been really great,
The state,
the state,
the
okay.
Department of Transportation,
Gotcha.
with our local folks,
Gotcha.
they're in charge of those lights, and, but they're very responsive when we ask questions, and they had a software glitch on E Street, that you get up to E Street and it was red, and it was supposed to be green all the way through and it was red, and they, anyway, into the weeds of the details, something didn't update correctly,
Right.
and bring it to their attention that they've done it.
Because if it's a software issue, and I agree, that corner has gotten a lot better. Like, when you guys did the lights and you're tweaking it, it's gotten a lot better. So maybe we could have them focus on that a little bit, but we really push the Newberry, as a city, we get behind it. You know, because that seems like, as far as development is concerned, a bigger project. I like your point, Eric, that if the city gets behind one, the state might listen, and then we focus on the software side of things to get us by on that Leota issue. So just a thought I had.
And we can keep after them on the design part
Right.
of everything that we can do to try to improve that short-term, intermediate, long-term on what we can do, so.
Brendan, that project with Newberry and that vision, do you see safety alterations to the corner of 4th and Newberry?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the state's talked about lots of different
Okay.
considerations, depending on the geometry of the 4-lane coming up. They've talked, I've heard them talk roundabout, traffic light, everything you can think of.
So they're aware of the need there?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yeah, they've talked about a lot of different things. We've had a really good interaction, so I appreciate all the questions and comments and
Okay, I'm just gonna ask you one.
absolutely, no, keep going. The way it goes is until we run out of questions, so.
It's only been an hour. On Dixie, a few years back, when it was talked about widening that, I know some of the people that lived out there.
Didn't want it.
Has
Correct.
that all been resolved?
I don't think so.
Or does it matter?
That's why it's on the 6-year plan.
Yeah, that's, where that fits in the 2 to infinity, I don't know.
Dixie's kind of like Eugene, it's a right-of-way issue. Some of it's 40 foot, some you get 50 foot, then it's going to purchase right-of-way, that type of.
Yeah.
And then there's amenities in the way
Mhm.
that, so, I mean, there's quite a few obstacles that have to
So we
get
might not
resolved.
have it for a while. I just wondered, if people don't want it, do you have to do it? You know, I didn't know.
If they don't want to, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, then it becomes a political, I mean, to do it as a district, I mean, you can petition, they can petition for it as a paving district, and as a paving district, you need to have more than 50% that want it. And what I've seen a lot of times is in instances, it's frequently 50-50. And so 50 want it, 50 don't want it. You need to be over that 50% for it. But then the property owners pay for it, and then the property owners pay for it, then they don't want it. So,
So then I'm gonna ask you,
Well, in that specific situation, the property owners wouldn't pay for that, correct? Because that's already a paved city street?
well, it gets into, they can pay for, I mean, they can petition and ask for it, because if it was a county road, it's never been upgraded to a city street. So that becomes a little bit of a policy discussion at the council level on how they wanna finance that, so.
Because I thought that was part of the discussion early on when that development was proposed, that the widening of that street would not be paid for by the local property owners.
And it could go, I mean, my opinion is it could go either direction. And so, I mean, that would be a little bit of, I mean, that would get into a petition. If someone could petition for it and then the cost, but it'd be done in the way that the city policy as far as 12 foot goes to each adjacent property owner in the middle portion the city pays for, and they pay for intersections, things like that. That's the standard protocol for the divvying up of the costs, that type of thing. But
Thank you.
And then there's a couple of gravel streets over there on, E, H, and G.
Mhm.
They don't get a lot of traffic.
No, and those were looked at on the long term. There was some CDBG money that was used that did a lot of paving up in this part of town. And then there was some CDBG money, can't say that too fast, over in this part of town. And that was some of the remnants of, those would fit some of the LMI requirements for CDBG money. And so those would be on the longer term, maybe it might even get into some of the stimulus money, how it's targeted for certain things that was on there for. So that's a different line of thinking, it's like what you said, as far as the volume of traffic, no, but for the neighborhood and maybe development, and depends on targeting of money, so, it's a good question.
I just wouldn't make it work.
That's why we've got the,
I know.
the six we could chop off and save for long term, but.
Just some feedback I get on Dixie, you know, I live right there, it's on my dog walking route, and as I talk to people, and I haven't certainly talked to everybody over there, maybe you guys hear different things, I don't sense there's a huge angst there for road widening among the residents. I mean, I think they'd like that road to be in a little better condition. But, you know, at this point, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where those houses build up at Phillip and Dixie, but they're so close to Phillip. I don't know that the residents there generally, I'm sure there's different opinions, are that wound up about something happening there. And
It's kind of related.
I think we've maybe had more anxiousness here than they have there about something happening with that road, but maybe I'm incorrect on that.
Well, and some of that's just past history,
Yeah,
from my standpoint, Matt and I, well, even to a degree Lane, haven't heard firsthand accounts, you know, so a lot of times things revisit in the future, you know, and things are different, so.
a lot of the people I've talked to in Dixie like kind of the quaintness of that street, and I think they feel if staying the way it is narrow, it almost takes it from being a main cut-through point where you have both Lakeview and Bear. And again, I mean, you have to survey them or something, but I do generally hear that they like that neighborhood, but would love to get some of the potholes and whatnot out of it, but I hear less for us for widening it or being worried about the sidewalk width and those types of things.
I think that was more, yeah, I agree with you, I think that was more as a deterrent for the city council to TIF the Dixie project.
Yeah.
That Dixie was gonna get overused now, but I still think that the right going up to Eisenhower is the way to go. I think that was more of a deterrent to have the council not TIF this
I
project.
agree with you.
Ty, I would say I get calls, you know, on the potholes and the condition of it, and that's where our quandary kind of is as far as we're trying to do maintenance the best we can. It really needs some kind of reconstruction, but normally in city, you know, now that it's a city street, it needs to meet city specs for construction, and they do want to keep it that narrow street, so that's where we're stuck
Yeah,
at now.
that's the quandary.
How much then do you repair when you can't replace like it should be because they don't want to widen? So I mean, that's where the discussion comes in.
Well, I think you've got the right beat on it.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, do we have any kind of flexibility in that? I mean, or is it a one-size-fits-all?
Well, the thing we run into that's probably the toughest to deal with is the 40-foot right-of-way.
Is that a city ordinance?
No, I mean the functional, the practical. Now, I'm not saying the ordinance side, but just on the 40-foot wide, you know, say you put a 30-foot wide street in there, out of 40 foot, depending on how it's developed, there's probably, I mean, normally there's stuff in there, meaning mailboxes, trees, maybe sentimental trees, landscaping. There's things that get in that 40 feet, so there isn't Cause I think in some of that, the asphalt's probably 14, 16, I don't know, I haven't measured, do you know that?
Maybe 16.
16 foot wide, so if you have 16 out of the 40 and you have your personal, I call it personal effects, I don't know what you want to describe, the stuff that gets in there, trying to go even, let's say, a 30-foot, you know, street stretch through there. You have 10 foot, you put a sidewalk, 4 foot, 4 foot, plus your 6 foot or 6 inch curb and gutter, you're 31, plus 9, you're 39 feet. You've taken the entire right of way for that, and it gets really hard to even, then you need temporary easements just to build it. And then if you try to put any other infrastructure, storm sewer, water sewer, you could probably do it with easement. Just functionally, you'd have to go through a design and see 40 foot just gets really difficult to even try to build it. I mean, even if you didn't change it, I mean, you'd obliterate that whole 40 foot width.
I think they didn't want to lose their yards. It's not like
Yes.
they were gonna lose most of
Exactly.
their yards.
Well, and that's my question exactly, is do we have to build a 30-foot street or a 40-foot street with storm drains and gutters and curbs and sidewalks and everything? Can we carve out a specific protocol for this stretch that's different from the rest of the city and make it work with the idea maybe in the future that it's designed such that it could be added onto in the future if that time would arise, and still be able to accommodate those folks?
I think it's definitely a balancing act, and it's something you'd probably have to look, probably almost, you know, every block stretch through the whole way and see if that's doable. The drainage is an area that would definitely be a concern for me to make sure that it would work. I mean, it's functioning to some degree right now. The question is, you know, the thing you start looking at as far as you have off-street parking, that's a concern. But there's a lot of variables that could be looked at with that. But I still think 16 foot is really narrow.
It is.
I mean, the county minimum is 22 feet, so at a minimum.
City is 24 plus the curb.
And so it would, I mean, the 30 foot, I mean, you're looking fairly close, probably 26, 28 feet would be the minimum you could get through there. But, I mean, those are things that can be looked at and try to, but there's always a give and take, because sometimes people are like, well, I want parking. Well, if you do this, you can't have parking, you know, a certain, you go really narrow, you're not having parking. You're not pulling off into the grass either. You know, there's always a give and take. So if you do really narrow, these things happen. If you do a 37 foot wide, you can't have parking on both sides. And the other thing is residents change. So people that are really strong about this, and in X years, people don't want that, they want this. And so, I mean, that's the hard part, is trying to target, that's why you get into some of the standards, is the thought is that it supersedes the individuals that are there. It's more of a corporate community thought. I mean, that's the thought process. I'm not saying that you jam it through, but that's the thought of trying to keep it more uniform, is you know what to expect.
Yeah, that hits it on the head. I mean, when we start making special exceptions for one group, as a staff, it becomes very, very challenging to tell people yes or no. And so that's why cities all over have standardized installations for streets and sewers and water mains and you name it, because you get into the, well, they got it.
Really?
And then well, it's like, it's just really hard for us.
Yeah.
I have a feeling when Brad's my age, this will still be on the 1 in 6 years.
Right.
When he's 45.
Something like that.
If things keep going, they'll be just right for the horse and buggy.
That's right, Pete, I think we want to be retired from work too. When
Exactly.
If you can still have a horse then.
Well, it's been really good discussion and question and comments. I appreciate all of you asking so many good questions, and my phone is open for more questions, because I'm more of a post-processor, so I think of things after everybody leaves when you're walking out the door. Oh, sorry. So feel free to call or email, whatever, and if there's any other last questions here.
Can I make just a comment, Brent?
Sure.
I'd like to
He left.
He snuck out.
Eric left. But I think Eric hit the nail on the head. I mean, I really appreciate your willingness, you, Matt, the whole staff, willingness to stand before us and answer questions and be straightforward. And I think, from my perspective, this goes a long ways to letting the community know that the city government is working for the people. And I think that transparency is very important. So thank you.
I'd echo that, even though this is the first time I've ever been to one of these.
I didn't know
I
what
think
one and
it's
six
awesome.
meant.
I
I just showed up.
I've been doing it for 10 years, and this is very good.
So I sent Renee an email. How do I prep for this? You don't have to.
It's nice that you can just show up and absorb and
There you go.
ask
Question I'm
questions.
not even gonna say out loud.
Anyway, and feel free to, I'll stay around for a little bit if you wanna ask more questions, whatever I hear, so.
I gotta go.
Yes.